What up, friends? It goes on, and today we're going to be reviewing Father John Misty's newest album, Chloë and the Next 20th Century. This is the fifth album overall by American singer-songwriter Father John Misty. Josh Tillman has always been quite a character, I think, from the odd relationship dynamics expressed on I Love You, Honey Bear, to the socio-economic and political satire and ramblings that are on pure comedy, and even the thoughts about life and death that are present on God's Favorite Customer. Tillman's wit and mindscapes are definitely one of his most defining features, I think. That's not even to mention his various genre switches, pulling from the 60s but arranging these different and lush instrumentals to back up his projects that have a varying sound depending on the subject matter. While some of those arrangements are definitely better than others, I think Chloë does a good job at capturing the past, giving us a glimpse of the 50s, until we get to the uncanny mistakes that were present back then that still happen today. Chloë is a really quirky intro for the record, also establishing the fact that Josh Tillman is kind of taking a back step in this album's narrative. The delicate strings and the soft traditional pop and big band-esque beat are a pretty lush backdrop to a sort of story about a man who is smitten by this girl named Chloë to the point where he is essentially ignoring all of her red flags because he's so in love with her. However, we also have to keep in mind that the red flags that are being expressed here are essentially from the point of view of an average guy in the 50s. Josh's flows are lively and serene, and the horn segment kind of feels like a celebration of sorts to the blooming of this new relationship. We're just setting up the scene and the characters at this point, of course. Goodbye Mr. Blue is a more traditional sound for Josh, with a very simple and delicate acoustic-driven ballad as its backdrop. This elegant yet somber tune is actually about the narrator's cat, who he got from a previous relationship, and he's kind of looking back and reminiscing on his experiences and companionship with this cat. The strings really help drive these heartwarming moments home. However, the cat also brings up feelings of his past relationship in the narrator, so he's almost reminiscing about two different things at once, kind of his emotions spiraling into each other as he wishes he can get back together with his ex. It's a really interesting and niche set of circumstances that really only Father John Misty can put together. However, I do think it does a really good job at describing how surprisingly poignant the average human experience can be. The next two songs are a bit more standard, kind of filling in the mood again to bring us back to the relationship angle that was present in the first track on the record. The instrumentals are kind of tame and occasionally sound like they're flowing into each other, however they're still pretty pleasant. Josh's vocals on Kiss Me I Love You have a weird effect that's put over them. I'm honestly not sure if I like it, to be honest. It is still an endearing song though, even if it is a bit plain from a lyrical standpoint. Everything But Her Love definitely has a more driving instrumental thanks to its piano and guitar flares, and the vocals are also much more lively in comparison. The track has a very warm feel with the little guitar intermissions and flute sections, as the narrator is essentially crooning how this girl he's into has given him everything but her love. The progression in this track is also pretty well done, as the instrumentals largely pick up as the track goes along. It almost feels like Disney-esque at times, which is pretty cool. There's a really interesting narrative sidestep with the next track, Buddy Rendezvous, with Josh essentially playing the character of a man who just recently got out of prison and is going to meet his daughter at a bar to give her some not-so-great advice. It's a really somber track, and I'm getting some serious Leonard Cohen vibes here, especially in the narrative, the piano, and the horn segments as well. The narrator is lamenting about how his daughter has changed in his eyes. However, you really could only feel pity for him because by his daughter changing, she's just becoming more independent and not going along with everything that he says anymore. Especially when he tells her to forget that lefty shit your mom drilled in your mind. It's really a ballad about a man who just can't keep up with the times, and he just has to watch as his daughter leaves him behind. So it's a really interesting narrative that has a not too happy conclusion, actually. It's pretty poignant. Q4 is a more dynamic track to help break up the pace of the record thanks to those marching drum beats and soaring strings. The sort of Bell and Sebastian instrumental style largely follows suit in the lyrics as well, as the song is depicting the rise and fall of an author named Simone. The track does have a playful edge to it, however, like pretty much every other song on here, it hides a very melancholic undertone. Her work is essentially being corporatized and stripped away of any human character. It's humorously describing how things largely become less humorous the more corporate and big they become, or how something is described as humorous when it's the most cookie-cutter shit out there imaginable. If there's a weakest moment on the record, it's definitely Olividado, Otro Momento. It's such a nothing track. It's like the elevator music that plays when Josh's characters are going up to the lobby or something like that. The bossa nova instrumental is very rudimentary and simplistic and pretty much stays the same throughout the track's entire runtime. It's so low impact, and the song isn't short either. It's almost 5 minutes long. There's largely not even a lot to say about this one, as the lyrics are very vague and basically about nothing, and the same beat and guitar passages just repeat and permeate throughout this entire track. I also don't have too much to say about the next track, Funny Girl, either. I feel the same about this one as I did with Kiss Me I Love You. It's a simple track about being infatuated with this girl and all of her quirky traits with a fairly lush instrumental behind it. At this point in the record though, it just feels like retreaded ground. We've had a lot of instrumentals like this on previous songs. However, I will say that I do like the sort of vocal jazz sax that's going on here. It just doesn't add enough to justify its inclusion on the record, I think. However, I will say that I do prefer this one to I Love You if I had to choose between the two. The next two tracks, unfortunately, are largely similar cases as well. The Disney-esque flutes of Only a Fool are pretty fun and have a nice bounce to them, and I like the structure of the track as it doesn't have a chorus, so it sounds kind of stream of consciousness a bit. The smoky and noir-filled ambience of We Could Be Strangers was also pretty cool and pretty interesting coming after the previous song, but again, it feels like we're kind of just meandering around the same topics and lyrical themes, even some instrumentals as well. It feels unnecessary. The album does end with a big punch, though, with the next 20th century. The opening lines of "The Nazis that we hired for our wedding band" immediately pulls you in, calling into question right off the bat the ethics and morals of these famous artists that still receive airtime even today. It's essentially pointing out that a lot of the sort of classics that we've grown used to were written by people with some not so great views. This song largely feels like Father John Misty coming back into play after our brief excursion into the 50s, sort of bringing us back into the modern day. The gradual progression from the ominous and simple opening instrumentals to the fairly intense guitar passages at times feels very distinct in his catalog as well. This song also largely follows many of the nihilistic themes that Josh has experimented with since writing pure comedy, essentially seeing us humans, repeating the same mistakes century upon century and not learning from them. However, also like his other works, he does have a hint of optimism in it, as he says he'll essentially be taking the love songs and the connections to others over just feeling miserable about the state of the world. Now, this is definitely going to be Josh's most divisive album, I think. However, to be honest, I do think it does tackle the sort of slow burn effect much better than pure comedy did. Despite still sounding samey at times, I feel like there is still more variety still, and I also really think the lyrical themes and topics on this album are pretty interesting and kind of subtle as well, with this whole difference between the old school worldview and the more modern worldview. I will say though that the narrative as a whole is fairly spotty, as it largely feels like each track is a separate mini story as opposed to combining into one overarching narrative. Some songs also add to the themes a lot more than others do. I was also a bit disappointed that Father John Misty didn't commit to the vocal jazz influences as much as I would have liked, as a lot of the tracks on here actually just sound like normal Father John Misty songs, but over a traditional pop beat or with an orchestra behind it. However, I will say that I do still think the album is pretty solid. I do like the very consistent and concise narrative and theme, along with the instrumentals as well, and I also really like the sort of time capsule lyrical angle that he's got going on here, as he's essentially speaking through different narrators with different points of view rather than himself alone. However, it's a bit too one-note at times, and I feel like it occasionally lacks the wit that Father John Misty is known for. With all that being said, I'm feeling a light 7. It's still definitely a good project, however, I don't see people coming back to this one as much as some of his other work. But of course we do have to talk about album covers on this show, and I think this one is okay. It's got a good thing going on, however, I feel like the framing needs work. I feel like we could take out the little ballerina-style doll and just have him on the cover, put him front and center, and that would be pretty good. I really do like the black and white color scheme and the sort of odd, quirky pose he's in. If they even blew him up a bit further, brought him closer to the viewer, I think that would have also helped, kind of maybe giving it a sort of alternate take on the God's Favorite Customer cover, but with a few different sort of movements and I think adjusting the framing a bit, it could be a pretty cool cover. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this newest album by Father John Misty. What did you guys think? Do you think he was really onto something here? Is this really your sort of music? Or do you think it's a bit too mundane and simplistic for your liking? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you too have a time capsule. What? And until the next one, farewell.